Hi everyone, this is your boy the corner. Elvis corner. First Corinthians 15 verse 35. Paul was responding to was using his letter to respond to, should I call them, critics of the resurrection of the dead, or should I say, they have no knowledge about the resurrection of the dead. Uh, so Paul continued by saying that, what are you saying? Are you saying the resurrection of the dead is not real, just as some claims that the resurrection of the dead has come to pass, this and that, all this conspiracy theory? So if you continue from verse 35 downward, there Paul begins to talks about the seed. That if you plant a seed, that's did the seed resurrect? Did the seed grow by the same body that you plant it with? The sovereign power of God in every sphere of human life. And I continue to say that there is glory to every flesh. The flesh has its body, the beast has its own body, the fish has its own body, the bird had their own, or his or her own body, or their own body. Then it talks about the celestial body to the terrestrial body. And I too have been trying to meditate, think on this resurrection of a thing. So I haven't gone through meditating and a little bit of study. I came to realize that there are two types of resurrection. We have the resurrection of the righteous and the resurrection of the wicked. I say there are two types, two kinds of resurrection. We have the resurrection of the righteous and the resurrection of the wicked. Then if you study Revelation chapter 20, verse 1 to end, you will see there that there is a different time period for each resurrection. The time frame for, or the period of time that the resurrection of the righteous will take place is different from the time frame the resurrection of the wicked will take place. So there are two kinds of resurrection, or two types. We have the resurrection of the righteous, then we have the resurrection of the wicked. Then I said the time frame, the period of time that each resurrection will take place is entirely different. Don't forget, the God of the Bible is God of orderliness, God of sequence. So one happened before the other. Just as you can see, if you go back to creation, Genesis chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, we see the sequence of things as God was creating step by steps, orderliness, sequence before even He created man. So also the end time events, they are going to take place in step by steps or sequence or order of events. So that is why you see that the resurrection of the righteous is the time period for the resurrection of the righteous is different from the time period the resurrection of death take place. The Old Testament, Genesis to Malachi, speaks or talks about resurrection. And it is not spiritual resurrection that it talks about. It talks about the literal bodily resurrection of man. The New Testament talks about the body resurrection or the literal resurrection. It talks about it in words. It talks about it in figure. It talks about it in prophecy. Then it talks about it in reality, which I'm going to uh, expatiate or talks about a little bit more. What I'm trying to say is, I said the Bible comprises of the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. The Old Covenant is the Old Testament, then the New Covenant is the New Testament. We are talking about resurrection, bodily resurrection. Now, I said the New Testament from Genesis to Malachi, the Old Covenant, talks about the body, the literal resurrection of our body. And it talks about it in words, in figure, in prophecy, and in reality, which I said I'm going to expatiate a little bit about it. Now, the New Testament equally talks about the bodily resurrection of the righteous and of the wicked. Christ himself talks about the resurrection. Then the apostles, they talks about it. Paul talks about it. John talks about it. In the New Covenant. You know, this resurrection, this physical resurrection of our body makes me to began to think, began to reason. Why is God going to resurrect our physical body? Why is God going through that lens? Why is it that man is going to be resurrected again? Man is coming back to life. Why is God taking us through that lens? We see Christ. The Bible says the first fruit is our first fruit. He died and he resurrected. He resurrected body. But that body that Christ resurrected with is an immortal body. And we too, we are going